Every summer, my mother would take me to visit our relatives who lived out in the country. My cousin and I were almost the same age and were always up to mischief. We spent our days out in the fields exploring the area, making bows and arrows, sharpening knives, throwing rocks, climbing trees, and tracking wild animals. One day we set out on a long walk across the fields, not really having any idea where we were going. Sometimes we like to get ourselves lost and then try to find our way home. After a few hours of walking, it was getting late in the afternoon when we came across a farmhouse that looked as if it was abandoned. On the property there was a small storage shed, so we jumped over the fence and decided to find out what was inside. We found that the doors were locked. There was a small keyhole, but we couldn't see through it because it was blocked by dust and thick spider webs. We walked towards the house and noticed that the front door was standing open, but there was no sign of life coming from within. The yard was overgrown with grass and weeds. The only sound we could hear was an old windmill nearby, rattling in the breeze. I went to the door of the house and shouted, "Hello!" but there was no answer. It was then that the smell hit me. It was the stench of damp, mold, and decay. I stepped inside. There were clothes and papers everywhere, and some cardboard boxes. There was also an old bed, some racks of moth-eaten clothes, and a leather armchair. I took a few steps forward, and the smell seemed to get worse. A feeling of intense uneasiness washed over me, and I wanted to turn and run away. Just then, something caught my eye. At the foot of the bed, between some boxes, lay a head. It was covered in gray hair. There was an old man lying on his back, his face turned upwards and his eyes open. He was dead. I let out a horrible yell, then grabbed my cousin by the arm, and we both ran as fast as we could. As we fled across the yard, we were passing the shed outside when the locked door suddenly crashed open, and an old lady was standing there. Her hair was in disarray, and when she smiled, her lips parted, revealing a row of rotten teeth. She was carrying a bloody knife in her hand. She made an attempt to grab me as we rushed past, but I managed to dodge her and kept running. I didn't dare to look back. I just ran and ran as fast as I could. It was a few minutes later that I realized my cousin wasn't with me. I stopped in my tracks, breathing heavily, and looked around. He was nowhere to be seen. My heart sank. I started running again, desperately trying to get back to my aunt and uncle's house as quickly as possible. Eventually, I saw the lights of their house in the distance. As soon as I reached home, I ran inside and called out to my mother. My relatives gathered around me, and I started babbling and begging them to go find my cousin. My uncle got in his truck and brought me with him. Eventually, we found the old farmhouse, but my cousin wasn't there. Neither were the old man or the old woman. After searching for a while, my uncle called the police. A few days later, my cousin still had not been found. The farm was searched from top to bottom, but there was no trace of him, and he remains missing to this day. It's one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in this region. I don't know what happened to my cousin that day, but I'm glad it didn't happen to me. After the murders, the house had lain empty for 2 whole years. The newspapers were full of sickening details about the brutal crime, and whenever prospective buyers heard what happened behind these gray concrete walls, they stayed well away. Then one day a young married couple named Mr. and Mrs. Griffin came to view the house. They liked the look of it and the price was very low, so they decided to buy it. Before they moved in, they had some workmen come to clean the bloodstains off the walls, and the bathtub, and the kitchen sink. They had to install new carpeting to cover the stubborn bloodstains on the floorboards, and even after airing the house out for a week, there was still an odd smell that lingered in the hall closet. The Griffins thought it would be best to avoid telling their children about the grim history of their new home. There was no sense in needlessly upsetting the little ones, and it might cause them some sleepless nights. For the first few days they moved in, things went splendidly. The children had a party and invited all their friends from school. Mr. and Mrs. Griffin went around and met their new neighbors. It seemed like they were all settling in nicely. One night as they were getting ready for bed, Mrs. Griffin was in a thoughtful mood. "Did you know that one of Miss Bentley's hands was found in the kitchen?" she asked. "Oh," said her husband, "really?" "Yes, but her fingers were in the dining room." "How ghastly," replied her husband. "I wouldn't mind if he had used a gun," she said, "but the way he carried it out, bits here and bits there, well, he made a mess of the whole house." "It wasn't all his doing," said her husband. "If Mrs. Bentley had insisted on dragging herself around from room to room trying to escape, she wouldn't have had to drag herself if he hadn't chopped off her legs," said his wife. "I suppose you're right, dear," Mr. Griffin replied. "Do you think we should invite the Talbot sisters over for dinner tomorrow?" "Oh, those are two pair of old gossips," said his wife. "The only reason they'll be coming is to see if we manage to get rid of all the stains." "He didn't plan it in advance, you see," said her husband. "How was he to know that her sister would drop by unexpectedly? And of course, when the mailman came by to deliver the letters and saw what was going on, obviously he had to go too." "It was rather a mess," said Mrs. Griffin. "I think I'll take a bath before bed." "In the bath where he chopped off her legs?" asked her husband. "Yeah, that one," she replied. "The downstairs bath looks a bit too dirty." "Well, in that case, I'll just pop into the bathroom while you're getting ready," he said. Mr. Griffin was shaving himself in the mirror when he suddenly felt very strange. Staring at himself in the mirror, he knew there was something wrong. He just didn't feel himself. And then, as he stared at his reflection, an odd sensation came over him, as if his mind was somehow clouded and he wasn't quite in control of his own actions. He quietly opened the bathroom door, walked silently down the hall, and tiptoed up the stairs to the attic. When he got there, he opened a small cupboard and saw it sitting there in the corner. He had no idea how, but he knew it would be there. The axe. Mrs. Griffin was sitting in front of the bedroom mirror, putting her hair up, when she noticed her husband come into the room. His hands were behind his back, almost as if he was hiding something, and there was a curious look on his face. "What are you thinking, dear?" she asked. "I'm thinking I won't make such a mess this time," he replied. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. If you'd like to, you can follow me at Twitter. The handle is @FuzzyPantaloons, and I'll see you all next time.